This episode of Musical Hell is brought to you by Midnight Musicals. Welcome to the podcast Musical Underground. And by Cafe Himbo Cookbooks, celebrating his 10th anniversary. Thank you. Greetings, mortals. Welcome to another session of the Infernal Court in Musical Hell. I'm Diva, your judge, jury, executioner, and you must love to watch me suffer. Why else would anyone use their Patreon budget to bribe the court to sit in judgment of It Couldn't Happen Here, the first, and mercifully only, feature-length film starring the Pet Shop Boys? Usually when recording artists get a movie gig, they're either playing a character, often a loosely disguised version of themselves, or they play themselves in some kind of fanciful exploit. But Neil Tennant and Chris Lowe tend to a more esoteric frame of mind, and they recruited experimental director Jack Bond to help them put something together based on the music of their first two albums. The result? Well, it is my Herculean task to make sense of that for you, as much as anyone can. So let's examine the case of It Couldn't Happen Here. Normally, this is the part of the trial where we go through what happens in the movie, but I'm going to get straight to the point. Nothing happens in this movie. It's mostly a set of disjointed sequences and music videos put together to create a feature-length project. You've got Neil Tennant biking around in formal clothes, you have Chris Lowe performing a reverse Mary Poppins, you have the world's most depressing workout video, and a twitchy vendor ranting about politics in between ogling naked girls, and you have the world's worst bed and breakfast guest.
Bless us, O Lord!
Sit! Ha ha! Silly laugh. No, I'm not.
The fact that he's not funny is, of course, the joke, but ironically, sin number one is that the movie's attempts at humor are little better. The British penchant for the absurd is definitely on display here. Several sequences have the feel of a Monty Python routine, with subversion of expectations and peculiar non sequiturs abounding. But even absurd comedy needs style, timing, and talent to pull it off, which the Pythons have in abundance, and this movie doesn't. Without it, the absurdity is less surprising and amusing, and more mean-spirited and frustrating. This situation is not helped by sin number two, which is the lack of charisma displayed by Tennant and Lowe. The Pet Shop Boys cultivated a kind of detached, enigmatic stage presence which distinguished them from the flashier acts of the 1980s. But what works for a 5-minute music video, or even for a concert performance which allows for more focus on the music, makes for very boring central figures in a feature-length movie. The only difference between the two of them is Neil is in a tux and Chris in a knit cap and leather jacket. They don't seem to be participating much in what's happening, even as disinterested observers or as straight men for all the weirdness going on. They're just there, and if they're not interested in what's going on, why should we be? But the movie is more than just bad comedy sketches. Sometimes it's bad social commentary, as in the sequence where a blind priest, played by Joss Ackland, you know.
They call me Mr. Tubbs.
Anyway, he wanders through spouting verse while leading a troupe of schoolboys, two of whom are apparently Neil and Chris's younger selves, who break away from the group and escape into a carnival, where the main act is their Catholic guilt-induced sexual dysfunction. There's a lot of titillating images of women in this movie, which theoretically represents the struggle against religious repression, or the mainstream objectification of the female form, or a prepubescent curiosity about taboo subjects. Mostly it's just an excuse to have a bunch of ladies running around in their knickers. And mud wrestling. Can't forget the mud wrestling. Anyway, the kids get hauled off by the priest, who yells at a bunch of fishermen while they haul a cross up out of the ocean, and that's enough of that scene. Next up, cars! A lot of cars, apparently. Not that much that happens in this movie has any relationship to anything else that's happening, but this scene is pretty pointless even by this movie's standards. You get the feeling it mostly exists because West End Girls was one of their biggest hits and they knew they had to work it into the movie somehow. Anyway, Neil and Chris go to buy a car at the world's most dystopian dealership, but first they have to contend with a slick salesman who's determined to impress them with his cleverness, even though they just want him to get on with it so they can buy the car and get on with their lives.
It's quality that counts with you, sir, not the cost. Am I right? Or do the brown bears live in the woods?
How much?
Which, to be honest, is a lot like the experience of watching this movie. With the car finally in their possession, the Pet Shop Boys go on a bit of a road trip. If you want to know where or for what purpose, you haven't been paying attention to the movie thus far. It's mostly an excuse for some random encounters. The first involves a hitchhiker who bears a rather astonishing resemblance to the crazed killer being described on exposition radio.
I smell youth. Vintage youth.
And as he's also played by Ackland, he bears an astonishing resemblance to the blind priest from earlier. This may be further religious commentary, or it could just be that everyone encountered by the Pet Shop Boys in this movie is played by 4 stock players. The scene with the murderer is one of the better ones in the movie. Ackland's lines are mostly insane rambling, but some good bits sneak through.
You don't have any weapons in there, do you?
Why, what do you need?
We also get to hear the Pet Shop Boys cover of Always on My Mind, which is pretty darn good.
I guess I never told you I'm so happy that you're mine. If I made you feel second best, I'm so sorry I was blind.
But alas, this part ends as randomly as everything else, with the killer just up and deciding he doesn't want to do a double homicide today and getting out, and we're on to the next scene. This one is in a diner and is rather less effective. There's a waitress and an aviator and one particularly dramatic customer who it turns out has an unusual dinner companion.
What are you staring at?
If that thing asks for ham, I'm leaving.
Arguably, an object is a teacup only if it has been produced by a conscious agent with some general intention about its use or possible use, and consequently...
Existentialist philosophy aside, the timing of this entire scene is interminably slow. It's not interesting or unsettling or funny, it's just stifling and, well, let's leave it to the experts to describe.
It's dull. My God, it's dull. It's so desperately dull and tedious and stuffy and boring and desperately dull.
Neil eventually has enough of this and starts another musical sequence, this one featuring some kind of grim industrial ballet.
You bring me food, I need it. You give me love, I feed it.
Elsewhere, Aviator Guy has picked up on the existential theme and is going a bit around the bend.
That's it. I'll give them bloody seaweed finger bowls. Thinly sliced, crushed brown ice.
Someone really thought that line was going to be this movie's "That rug really tied the room together" or "We're in a narco-syndicalist commune."
Oysters! For your soul! The 1942 Chateau Latour! Ha ha!
I'd say this movie has gone off the rails at this point, but that would assume the existence of rails. This movie is wandering around in an open prairie teeming with herds of buffalo where no rail has ever been laid. Anyway, let's check back with Neil and Chris, shall we?
Someone tip them off. It's better to go sooner.
Still driving, and still gazing aimlessly out the window and singing. Which is a good portion of the middle third of this movie, and it gets old really fast. Not to mention contributing to the overall lack of interest and the feeling that the Pet Shop Boys aren't really in this movie, it's more like it's happening around them. After driving through a war zone, Chris pulls over so Neil can call his mom while white supremacist thugs leer at him. so they can exchange song lyrics. Which is not a bad idea. In fact, it's the closest this movie comes to being an actual musical instead of a series of music videos strung together. But it's ultimately hobbled by sin number 7, which is that neither it nor anything else in the movie matters in the end. There is a lot of art which defies convention and ironically derives meaning by evoking a sense of futility and meaninglessness. And there have been plenty of excellent movies that are weird and ambiguous, but there's more to that than being unconventional and random. A good movie like, say, The Lighthouse takes time to sit with its themes, exploring the levels of tension between its two protagonists, the maddening effects of isolation, and the gradual distortion of reality for both the characters and the audience. It Couldn't Happen Here has some ideas worth examining: the nature of time and reality, residual Catholic guilt and its effect on sexuality, strained relationships with parents. But they're never given more than a surface study, a brief glimpse for the length of a song before moving on to the next scene. Everything that happens, whether it's an encounter with a psycho, a talking ventriloquist dummy, a man on fire, or random ladies in lingerie, ends up having the same effect: mild bemusement and ultimate indifference. Things continue to get weird as Neil and Chris are ushered into a limo by a guy who might be my boss or just someone who likes to quote John Milton a lot, who promises to take them to their destiny, or in this case, the concert finale. But first, more driving scenes. Along with more explosions and a little pontification about death or something. But ultimately we arrive at the grand finale as the duo perform for Dancing with the Joel Grey Clones.
Tonight I've been walking in the rain. Someone's been talking and I've got the blame. Chained, framed, you know what I mean.
But eventually they just kind of give up, and so do I.
Oi! Oi! Not far to go, have you?
It Couldn't Happen Here is a critique of the social mores of Thatcher's Britain and an examination of the alienating quality of routine interactions, both casual and intimate. That doesn't mean it's any good. It's a bunch of disjointed ideas and sequences that's never as clever or profound as it thinks it is, which evokes nothing more than detachment and tedium. Therefore, the Court of Musical Hell condemns those involved to spend eternity at the world's worst open mic night. So let it be recorded. This session of the Infernal Court in Musical Hell is now adjourned. Yes, I know we're running a bit short. I can't help it. It's not my fault this movie has no plot or characters worth talking about. Well, what do you expect me to do about it? The case is closed already. I can't very well... Wait, I've got it. What do our offenders always do when they need to pad out running time? Well, yes, there is that, but I'm not about to inflict more James Corden on the world. If this movie was nothing but random images set to music, surely we can do the same, right? Hit it!